So this is our first session for this PMP question and answer session. So without further ado, so let's jump directly to our question number one. What I would recommend that uh, you put your answers in the chat box. This is the first question. What I want you guys to read the question, see the options, and then choose which is the best among these choices. The question is about a stakeholder analysis, stakeholder engagement from the stakeholder domain. So it's asking about what should you do with the stakeholders that have no interest or influence in the projects. Okay, so we have two A's and one D. All right. So let's see. Uh, when we talk about stakeholders, so we have this, let's say, the two-dimensional matrix that we use, where we have, let's say, interest is on x-axis and impact is on y-axis. So if we have the stakeholders and we divide it into four quadrants like this, so if we have stakeholders who have high interest, high impact, so these are the ones which we manage closely. Okay. And as in this scenario where the stakeholders have no interest or no influence in the project, so these are the stakeholders that we need to monitor them very closely. Okay. Just to make sure that maybe later down the project, if their interest level changes or their influence can change. So maybe in that scenario, we need to move them into the respective quadrant. And if the stakeholders have high interest, but they are low on influence, so we need to keep them informed. This type of stakeholders, uh, and the stakeholders who are high on low on interest, but they have high influence. So what we do with them? Any idea? Anyone?
Highly prioritize. Keep
We need to
satisfied.
keep them satisfied. Yes, good, Ahmed. Okay. So in this scenario, we are talking about these stakeholders. So yes, A is the right answer for this particular question. Okay. So this is basically what we have drawn here. This is a two-dimensional uh, stakeholder analysis grid. We call it, we can call it power interest grid, interest influence grid, or power influence grid. Uh, we can use any of these two, but the bifurcation of the stakeholder, or the classification of stakeholders will remain like this. If the interest is high and the influence is high, so we need to manage them very closely, and the others that we have just shown. Okay. And this is the explanation which we discussed already about this particular question. So I think without doing any further thing on this, so let's move to the next question. All right, so this is the second question that we have for today. Okay, yes, very good. Crashing is the right answer, because what happens in crashing? The scope has extended or expanded, but the schedule is not changed. So we are adding more resources to make sure that we remain within the allocated schedule. So in that scenario, the technique that we use is called crashing. Uh, this will help us in remaining on course in terms of a schedule, but obviously it will require more resources to complete the project within the allocated schedule. So good, excellent. Fast tracking, what happens in fast tracking? Can anyone tell me why fast tracking is not the right answer here?
Because in fast tracking, we start the activities in parallel.
And yes, Ahmed, you are very right. In fast tracking, we do not spend any extra money or extra resources. We try to exactly the right points you have mentioned. We try to compress the schedule by starting multiple activities in parallel. Okay, so now let's move to the third question. Okay, so we have only one answer till now. What about others? Okay, so Ahmed has utilized the elimination technique, which is uh, a good thing to do because this can help you in reaching to the right answers. And obviously, he chose the right answer, which is C. And why C is the right answer? And Mubashir also mentioned C as the answer. So, uh, yes, C is the right answer for this question. And why? Because you see, uh, when you are starting a new project uh, or you are joining or working on a new project, so the first thing that may help you is that whatever existing processes or existing knowledge that you have, the OPAs, the knowledge repository that you have within the organization, so you need to utilize that to tailor it, to tailor the existing assets that you have available uh, according to your current project needs. Uh, and OPAs is a very useful thing, which we call organizational process assets. Whenever you are planning or defining anything, when you are starting a project, so that those lesson learned registers and other documents and plans of the previous similar kind of projects, they will help you a lot in understanding what could be the scope, what could be the requirement, what could be the expectations from your project. So adapting and tailoring your existing assets should be your first thing or the most effective strategy before you go into other things as mentioned here, like creating a work breakdown structure and moving to the procurement part. Obviously, procurement will be done at a later stage. Uh, Once you have the plan or you know what scope you are going to deliver, what resources you will be utilizing or getting from outside the organization. So then you will be doing the procurement meeting or going for procurements and work breakdown structure. You will create your work breakdown structure obviously at a later stage. Right, so let's move to the question number 4. All right, so we have one answer of option D. What about others? So what we are doing here, the team, the development team and the product owner, they are reviewing user stories and you are in an iteration planning meeting. Okay. So while reviewing the user stories, you identify that some of the high value stories, they have more associated risks. So what should the agile project manager do? So what you do in this scenario? Okay, Abdul Rafi is also saying that D. Okay, so what happens in Agile? See, in Agile, we have a concept which is called risk adjusted backlog. Okay, and what this suggests that if you have user stories which you think they are more risky, you do not have much information or much knowledge or much understanding how these will be developed. They have a lot of maybe complexity around them, uncertainty. The team is uncertain how to work on those user stories. So it is always recommended in Agile uh, that you plan such kind of user stories early into your iterations rather than moving them backward into your project plans. You move them early so that you can develop an understanding about those. The team understands how these will be developed. And then once you have the information, you understand the complexity and how to deliver, then you can maybe plan them better and deliver them better. And you remain by doing it like this, where you inform your stakeholders, your customer, that this is what we think. We think that this user story has some complexity or risk involved around it. So that is why we are going to plan it earlier so that we can develop the understanding about it. And then once we have the understanding, so we'll share it with you, and then maybe we can plan it as per the priority recommended by you at that particular time. So keeping in view all these things, uh, the right answer for this option, for this question, is option number A, that you recommend that the team should include those use risky stories early into iterations rather than deferring them to some later stages. Okay. Pareto analysis is not relevant here. Pareto analysis is not the right tool that we use to prioritize user stories. Pareto analysis is more on the side where you are, let's say, trying to find out the root causes, or trying to identify which are the, we call Pareto analysis the 80-20 principle as well, which suggests that your 80% of problems or 80% of things that happen around you, they are basically caused by 20% of events or conditions. So if you uh, identify those vital few, we call them vital few as well, those vital few conditions or scenarios that lead to 80% of your problem. So if you can focus on these vital few 20% of things, so that will help you in resolving 80% of your problems or whatever scenario you have. So this is what Pareto principle is all about, and you can utilize this principle in a lot of scenarios. Let's say you are a sales manager, and you want to see who are your 20% customers that are giving you 80% of revenue. So if you identify those vital 20% of customers that are giving you 80% of your revenue, so you will be able to focus more on them, prioritize their requirements, so that you are make sure that these important stakeholders, they remain satisfied, and you keep getting the value for you and your organization. So this is an important point to remember in terms of agile perspective, that if you have any user stories which the team feels that they are risky, they have some risk associated, they have some complexity around it. So it's better to plan them earlier into iterations to develop the understanding rather than deferring them at a later stage. Okay. All right. So let's move to the fifth question. Okay. So what is happening here in this question? Said that you are reviewing your third project report, progress report, and you identify that the project is experiencing delays. due to late material deliveries, whereas your previous two project reports indicated that you were on track. So what would the project manager do next? So what is happening here, basically, this is a problem that you have identified, a current situation. And whenever you identify something which is problematic, uh, a current situation, something current, an issue that is happening right now, so we call it an issue. Okay, so this is basically an issue that you have identified, that now you are not on track, whereas previously you were on track. So whenever you identify any issue, the first thing that you do is you need to add it to the issue log, and then maybe you can include it in the project report. And after adding it into your issue log, then you can discuss, you can move to option A, that what should be the most appropriate way to respond to this issue. But the first thing that you need to do is to document that issue in your issue log. Okay, so this is very important to remember, that whenever you identify an issue, the first step should be to update your issue log, and then maybe you can do start analyzing it, why it has occurred, what you need to do, and keep updating your issue log. And same happens with the change request as well, that whenever you identify or someone requests a change, so you need to add it to your change log, you do the impact analysis, and then you move ahead as per the steps that is involved in the change management process. Okay, so this is an issue. So your first step should be, uh, the question is asking about the first step, uh, whether it is written as do next or what should the project manager do first. Both are same things. So your first step should be to update your issue log, and then maybe you can uh, move further in the process. Okay. All right. So let's move to question number 7. Okay. So what is happening here? That it's a hybrid project. You receive a notification that in response to a recent court decision, a new requirement needs to be incorporated in the project scope. So it's kind of a change request. Okay, that has forwarded to you, or that is requested. Okay, so whenever a new change comes, what is your first step should be that you update your change log, you do the impact analysis, and then based on your analysis, the next step is to submit the change request to your change control board for their evaluation. uh, you you are not supposed to accept it immediately. You also, without any impact analysis or going to your change control board, you cannot exclude it as well. And incorporating and accepting, more or less the same thing. So you cannot incorporate it unless you have the approval from your change control board. So for their decision, you first need to submit the change request, and based on their decision, if they approve it, you update the change log, you inform the stakeholder, you update your baselines, and then you start implementing it. And if the change is not approved, you update your change log and you inform the relevant stakeholders that the change is not approved. So this is how the change management process goes in project management. Okay, so C is the right choice for this question. All right, and here is the explanation for this, which we discussed already. All right, so let's go to the 8th question. What we are trying to do here, that you have the kickoff meeting, and the project manager that is assigned, you are now leading the team in identifying project risks. So it means you are in risk identification process. Okay. So in this scenario, you are in the risk identification process. So which risk are you now you need to identify which is the risk identification method that is best you can use in this situation where you have team members that are distributed in 6 different countries. So if you see into this in the options, the only risk identification technique that may be given is the Delphi technique. This is not a risk identification technique. The affinity diagram, uh, all the three that are given, the affinity diagram, the decision tree analysis, or the Monte Carlo analysis, these are all risk analysis techniques. Okay. They are not risk identification techniques. Okay. Monte Carlo analysis, we use it in quantitative risk analysis. Decision tree is also utilized in quantitative risk analysis. And affinity diagram is utilized in qualitative risk analysis. Okay. Delphi technique is a technique which is used in in identification of risk, and this is a technique which is kind of anonymous, where you used facilitated anonymous polling to identify risk. You can use it in other scenarios as well, in identifying or agreeing on a scope as well, or estimates as well. But you can also use it to when you are identifying risks. So what happens in Delphi technique, that you have a facilitator uh, who gathers the initial poll responses that come from the different stakeholders or different participants of this identification process. He gathers the responses and then he or she circulates them without attribution to the entire group, or without letting anyone know that from where the other responses are coming. The anonymity is maintained throughout the process. Uh, so after the first round, the group members they see what different responses are coming, and they compare those responses with their analysis, and then they can revise their contributions after looking at the input from others. And this process keeps on going anonymously over multiple rounds till you reach to a very close kind of consensus. So this is how Delphi technique works. It is anonymous, and you try to bring the responses closer uh, to each other by doing multiple iterations. But obviously, it takes time, but it also helps in removing any kind of biases, because no one knows that who the other party is that is sharing their feedback. That is a very important technique, Delphi technique, that we can utilize in multiple scenarios. So for this question, option C is the right answer, because this is the only risk identification technique that is mentioned here. The others are all risk analysis techniques. Okay. So let's move to question number 9. This should be a easy one. So what is happening here, that you are managing a project, blah, 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 and your vendor is responsible for a core module, which is undergoing an organization-wide transformation, and it is unlikely that the deliverable will be ready on time. Okay. So this is a situation that you have. So you had a risk mitigation plan uh, to use paper forms until the module is implemented. Okay. That the digital platform, let's say, it's if it is not available, if it is delayed, so you will be going back or utilizing paper-based working to keep your work running. Okay, but this strategy, so this was your what is utilizing your paper forms. This is your uh, primary risk response. Okay, this was your primary risk response. What was your risk? uh, your primary risk was that the digital module may get delayed. And for that primary risk, you had this primary risk response where you will be utilizing the paper forms. But implementing this risk response has an associated another risk that this may likely to slow down your interactions or your overall process. So what is this? This is your secondary risk. What is a secondary risk? That one, when you identify a risk and you plan a response for that primary risk that you have identified. So implementing that risk response can lead to another risk. So that risk that happens or that can happen when you implement your primary risk response. So we call that risk is as a secondary risk. So this is where this uh, situation or scenario is highlighting that you have a secondary risk. Okay, what happens with the what is a residual risk? A residual risk is something that after implementing all your risk responses, the risk that remains, that will still remain, that is called a residual risk. And for residual risk, you generally do not have any risk response plans associated to it. Okay. So, why secondary risk is the right answer here? Because implementing your initial or your primary risk response, you have another risk that can happen. So, the risk that happens uh, on the basis of implementing your primary risk response, so we call that secondary risk. Okay, so this is what we have discussed, that the secondary risk is a consequence of dealing with the original risk, and this is where uh, this situation was referring it. Ahmed is commenting that mitigate the risk, that means you don't fully solve the risk, so there will be maybe remain. Mitigate the risk, that means you don't fully solve the risk, so there will be maybe remain. So this is what we call residual risk. The risk that remains after implementing your risk responses. Uh, we call that a residual risk, and this maybe the risk is the importance or priority, or let's say severity of that risk is not that high, or maybe it may also be the case that dealing with that residual risk may have some cost associated that is higher than the actual consequence of that particular risk. So in that scenario also you uh, do not have any plan for those residual kind of risks. But again, these residual risks, you keep them in your watch list. uh, I hope you guys understand that for the risks we have a risk register uh, where we document or list all our risks, their risk responses, and everything related, all the details related to each and every risk. And you can say that watch list is a subset of your risk register, where we keep our residual risks, or the risks for which we do not have any plans, or we have not made any plans to how to deal with those risks. So all these kind of risks are documented or in the watch list, and you keep reviewing the status of those risks just to make sure that if any dynamics around those risks change, so maybe you need to uh, prioritize them in a different way. Okay. All right. So this is the last question of the day, our 10th question. So here we are trying to see, first you need to identify the type of risk. What type of risk is being mentioned here? Is this a positive risk or a negative risk, or whether it is an opportunity or a threat? Risk is of two types. Okay. You have a positive risk and risk can be negative. Positive risk, we call it opportunity, and negative risk are called threats. So this is basically a negative risk that is being mentioned here. Okay. And we have different risk mitigation strategies uh, for both type of risks. We have escalation, we have acceptance, we have a transfer, we have share. So what is happening in this scenario? That the contract is very attractive with a medium risk threshold. Okay. But the flip side is that there is a chance that if there are any delays, or the contract is not fulfilled, so maybe you can have some liquidated damages that you need to pay. Uh, so that is a negative risk or a threat to the vendor or the supplier. So how you can budget for it? So increasing the code, this is something that is not recommended by PMI at all. You cannot inflate things like this. Okay. You need to be transparent, you need to be fair in your dealings. So A is not the right answer. Okay. Advising management is also not is not the right answer, because it is something that is attractive and it has a medium risk threshold. So it is not a big risk. So advising this is also not the right option. Recording it as a risk in the risk register and review it regularly to avoid penalty. This is not going to solve your problems. Okay. Uh, because if you are going into the uh, delivery and you are accepting it, so uh, just recording it in the risk register and reviewing it regularly is not going to lead you anywhere in, until unless you have any strategy or a plan how you will be dealing with this type of risk. Okay. So in this scenario, even if you do the elimination technique, so even then you would have reached to the right answer. But since this was a negative threat, and in this kind of scenario where you have this kind of situation that can happen, so uh, you can go for uh, insurance coverage, and we call it uh, and this is also a strategy where you transfer the responsibility of that particular risk uh, by getting the insurance. Maybe you have a fire hazard or any weather related issues that can occur, risks that can occur. So in that scenario, buying insurance or employing this kind of strategy, we call it transfer. So C is the right choice for this particular risk. And yes, Ahmed, you are right. Option D, you can do it for low priority risk, or as we discussed in the previous question, the risks that are not significant, or maybe you accept them as it is. Okay, this is a risk. If it occurs, fine, but we are not going to deploy or have a plan ready for it. If it happens, we will just keep monitoring it because maybe the severity is low, the impact is low, and we are fine with it as an organization or a project team. So D is for those particular kind of risks. All right, so with this, we are done with today's 10 questions. So I hope you guys like the questions, the complexity level, and if you have any feedback, please feel free to share